Hello, I'm Benjamin Miss, and this is Introduction to Psychology. Today we're going to be talking about stress, lifestyle, and health. We start off by asking, what are the biggest stressors in your life? What we're thinking about now are the factors involved, and we'll be getting into an area that's currently called positive psychology. And this area of study is about kind of maximizing our abilities and self. It's a very different, very positive focus. When we think about the biggest stresses in our lives, we think about the biggest things that affect us, which are probably school, work, families, relationships. These are generally the biggest things. Health, for a lot of people, can be a big one, both physical and mental. But then there's a lot of environmental stuff too. People who might be dealing with poverty, food insecurity. These are massive areas of stress. When we think about stress, we think about the types that are stimulus and response based. If the environment is frightening, if the environment is dangerous, this is certainly a stimulus based stressor. Now, we also have physiological stressors that could be situational, that could be mental, emotional. Part of it is environmental response, but it can go beyond just the environment itself. Stress is interesting. Um, it's not necessarily always a bad thing. We tend to think of it as like a bad thing. How are you doing? Oh, I'm stressed. Everyone's stressed. Oh, it's all the time. There's so many demands on us. But if we had absolutely no stress, how would that be? This is defined by the process by where an individual perceives and responds to events that he praises as overwhelming or threatening to well-being, right? We appraise the, demanding or threatening event, and then, we look at the potential harm and then look at options for coping. And when we look at these overwhelming or things that are overwhelming or threatening, what we're looking at is, the idea that, seeing stress is a bad thing, but stress can be motivating. So there's another area called eustress, right, which is good stress associated with positive feelings, optimal health, and performance. And you compare this to distress, where these things are, problematic and, overwhelming. And the idea is moderate stress can be beneficial, especially in challenging situations. I've studied stress in the classroom and had students, look at their levels of stress. And I remember very distinctly a student who had a level I'd never seen before. It was so low. It was so low. This person said, nothing bothers me, right? They couldn't get upset. They just couldn't be bothered by things. And they weren't successful because there was no challenge. There was no, I have to, get this paper tinned and I have to meet these deadlines. These things are beneficial. We think about motivation and success. So like anything, it's going to come down to a balance. When are you being challenged enough? Like if you weren't challenged in your life, how bored would you be? We find challenges. We read things that might be difficult. We play games that are challenging, that cause us to, have to develop our skills, compete. We do these things because it's interesting. It makes things interesting. The issue is the balance. So consider, people who tend to have a lot of stress get sick more often. They have more, health issues like asthma, back pain, acne, hypertension, greater risk of heart attacks. And you also see shortened telomeres. This is, for instance, people who've had major adverse stressful experiences. And what we're looking at here is from the text, it's the idea of telomeres are on the very ends of your chromosomes, and they tell your cells how many times they can be copied. The idea is one of the things associated with aging is our cells have a certain number of times they can copy. And so when we age, we are kind of running out of telomeres. Now, there's plenty of things we can do that help to, maintain them, that keep these things, long and healthy and allow for more copying of the cells. But severely adverse stress environments are going to, in this case, we see decrease the length of the telomeres, almost like a premature aging. And looking at heart attack risk, this is something that I think is extremely important to know and discuss. How does someone know if they're having a heart attack? Well, people say, oh, left arm pain, right? That's the traditional answer. Maybe shortness of breath. But what's really interesting about heart attacks explains why women are more at risk when they have a heart attack of having a really adverse event or dying. And this is it. Women's heart attack symptoms are different from men's. It's like we consider the men's symptoms as like this one size fits all, but that misses out half of the population. And think about what this means, right? A man might have shortness of breath, sweating, chest pain, arm pain, even stomach pain or lightheadedness are common symptoms. But for a woman, maybe you'll see dizziness or shortness of breath, which you might see in common, but then you'd see nausea and vomiting, anxiety, back pain, neck pain. That's so odd, right? Because you're thinking, well, what about the chest pain? Well, women generally have different symptoms. And in your family, you might want to ask about what are this, if any of your family members have had a heart attack, what symptoms they had, because they could be different than the expected. So think about this. A woman could be feeling extremely anxious, dizzy, have nausea, neck hurts. Doesn't sound like a traditional heart attack. And what might someone say? Oh, you're just worried for no reason. And, well, she's not going to survive. So we want to be aware of these differences, including the psychological impact of this, right? Anxiety, what we think of as a psychological symptom, as a symptom of a major physiological event. Now, we also want to look at, back to kind of like these influences. How has stress changed over time? Well, there's a measured perceived stress, and over time, the perceived stress scores have gone way up. So over the past 25 years, the perceived stress scores have increased significantly, right? Women tend to have higher stress, perceived stress, and there's many possible reasons for this. But over the past 25 years, men have been catching up, and the difference is actually quite a bit smaller than it was historically. In fact, pretty much all groups have been seeing this increase. Here's, education. And what you see right now is, hey, it's a good thing that you're in college, because what do we see? The more education you have, the lower the level of stress. The less educated people have, the more likely they are to be stressed. And this is likely related to things we've talked about already, like unemployment, the ease of finding jobs, income. And income, we're going to talk about that when we talk about stress, lifestyle, and health as a major indicator, and how that kind of fits in psychologically, right? But we know that having enough money is certainly much less stressful than worrying about money. And so the more education you have, generally better jobs, better income, less worry. And let me just show you a quick image of the perceived stress scale. What we see here is, from 0 to 4, never, almost never, sometimes, fairly often, and very often. And we see these questions, even if some of it's kind of blocked out, you should still be able to see the general questions there. You're basically just being asked, how you feel about certain things. Like here, is number 7 in the last month. How often have you been able to control irritations in your life, right? If you are in a job that you hate, for instance, and you have just a lot of irritable things happening there, you may feel very out of control, you know. Um, and so there we see these kinds of situations. What's also interesting is this is a flipped scale, right? Because the more you feel in control, the less stressed you are. Question 6, how often have you felt that you could not cope with all the things you had to do? It's a very different kind of thing. So we look at one of the interesting things about measurements is things like flipped scales, where you see like sometimes answering the highest level means very stressed, sometimes it means not stressed. Now, back to the last group here, age. And not surprisingly, those over 65 have reported the least stress, and that has been continually going down. 65 being generally the retirement age, many people in this group, you don't have work requirements, children are grown up and out of the house, there's not as many stressors and demands on time. And we know that work is a major stressor for people, and in fact, when we look at kind of factors in happiness, it has been consistently shown that self-employment, right? If you can work for yourself, you can make quite a bit less money than you would make working for someone else and be happier. There's a lot that kind of comes with that, again, for most people. So we see in general, stress has been increasing, but it's kind of mixed, and there's definitely some variability due to age. So we look at how stress works, and stress causes the activation of what's called the sympathetic nervous system. This is one of the 2 main branches of the autonomic nervous system, right? And it seems like something we don't have a lot of, autonomic is like automatic, like, well, do we have a lot of control here? And it's kind of like environmental. Like if you're in a bad situation and you can get out of that situation, then you have control. And if you don't, you can very easily feel stuck. And these are all, well-known symptoms of stress, pupil dilation, bronchial tube dilation, heart rate increases, sweating, tension. These are all things associated with the fight or flight response. And what we see about these things is that physical stressors and emotional stressors affect us the same way. So it's very easy. And one of the things we see culturally is we tend to dismiss the emotional or mental stressors, kind of like get over it, right? And yet these things are affecting us the same way as starvation, a major injury, severe environmental issues would be affecting us. Having a bad day at work, feeling stuck on a problem can be major stressors. And of course, I think we also do a poor job of support in loss. As we're going through stress, and this is interesting and important given where we generally are, in over the course of like an educational semester, when we get to topics like this is the general adaptation syndrome, and it's been described quite well in regards to how people respond to and deal with stress over time. We see the stages of alarm, resistance, and exhaustion, and reactions to stress, go being physical and psychological manifestations. So let's look at the 3 stages and what's happening during these, right? We see in this image here, we've got this kind of normal level of stress, and then we've got stress resistance, and how well you're doing, and time. So as our stress level increases, right, we see here over the alarm phase, this means your stress level is increasing. Okay, and so your stress resistance is dropping, right? So the red dashed line is your regular stress. This blue line is stress, right? And how we're physically dealing with it, right? How our stress resistance is related to it. So when stress increases, you will see like immediately weight loss, hormone levels crank up, your adrenal glands and lymph glands enlarge in order to crank out more stress hormones. Now, stress hormones help us to sleep less, help us to, function and focus temporarily. So this alarm reaction is this kind of initial reaction where you see this kind of drop in ability, like, oh my goodness, I'm stressed. And then as your hormones increase, you reach into the resistance stage, where your body has adapted to the stressors. Now, the danger of this is we feel like, okay, I've got this. The problem is long-term stress. How long this can last is going to be individual, situational, how extreme it is. But think about how we often deal with semesters, right? Are you a person who by the end of the semester, you've just had it, or do you kind of feel like, yeah, you're able to kind of balance things pretty well? Well, over the course of time, right, let's say you're working and going to school, things are being due, grades are coming toward the end, and do we put things off, right? Are we studying regularly? Are we keeping up, or are we starting to feel overwhelmed? Well, people who work a lot and take a lot of classes are challenging themselves in a major way. And very often, we barely recover, between, like, for instance, one semester and the next, where there's so much more work to do. Finding balance is extremely important, and yet we're not good at that culturally. Well, by the time we reach the end, it's like April, May, or like, November, December, a lot of people may be falling into exhaustion, right? The body begins to shut down. Weight, you're losing weight again, the adrenals are depleted. You may start behaving inappropriately, right? Personality disorganization, lashing out for no reason, kind of like just freaking out. May lose contact with reality, and it could even, extreme long-term stress can even lead to death. When we look at how we deal with these things, it's very biological. We see very quickly here, this is the HPA axis, right? The hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. And what we're looking at, we see this kind of term, quite frequently. And what we're looking at is exactly this adrenal system response, right? The hormones. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland, all right? And both of these things are kind of in charge of regulating hormones in the body. They release hormones. The pituitary is releasing hormones into the blood, goes to your adrenals on your kidneys, releases more hormones. And you've got lymph nodes, you've got all sorts of, your thyroid, all these things are involved in hormones. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It can give you a boost of energy, but over time, it can weaken the immune system if it's sustained stress. So what do we do right now? How do we deal with this? Well, one method is called COPE. Calm your nervous system, originate a plan, persist, and evaluate progress. The first thing is calm your nervous system, right? And maintain the ability to do that. Take a walk, go for a swim, do something that's going to help you to relax, read a book, unplug, absolutely get away from, social media, technology, give yourself a break. So you're able to kind of think clearly, originate a plan. You got to figure out how you're going to cope with things, how you're going to continue these things. A lot of the times, halfway through the semester, it might be drop a class. Don't even think about it. You're overwhelmed. You're not doing well. Don't torture yourself. There's no deadline here. You can withdraw and try again, right? But you're looking for a way to manage. Now you persist. You've still got stressors. You've maybe reduced it a little bit. You've got to be able to continue to calm your nervous system. Do what it is that helps you to relax, meditate, whatever it is, it's going to help you to calm. And then you're kind of evaluating over time. But the key here is the first one, calm your nervous system, right? Keep it calm. Now we'll look at major stressors and risk factors. The biggest stressors for our poverty. Like, this shouldn't be terribly surprising to us. Money worries, food insecurity, extremely stressful. Also, chronic illness. Chronic illness is awful. Things like chronic pain, awful, extremely stressful, right? It doesn't seem like there's an end. For younger people, parental mental illness is a major issue. Having parents who are not emotionally able to, or mentally able to handle things and deal with things can be really challenging. And drug abuse is a major stressor. The body cannot handle large amounts of chemicals and the ups and downs associated with them for long periods. Now, protective factors include the family environment. Having a strong, stable adult is extremely important for children, right? And even for college-age people, having strong, stable people, stable relationships in their lives are extremely important. What are your support networks like? Do you have close friends that you can talk to, that you can just kind of be yourself with? And then there's personality characteristics. It's called resilience. Some people are more resilient. That means you can take two people, put them in a horribly abusive environment, and then one of them is just a wreck and the other one is handling it a lot better. And the factors involved in resilience aren't generally clear, but the thing I mentioned earlier about having a strong, stable adult is a major part for many, many people of that. Now, minor stressors involve things like traffic, deadlines, relationship problems, but these are still rough. And when we look at what are the most stressful occupations, right? What do people say? And we'll kind of look at that. Think about that. What are the most stressful occupations? What do most people say? Do they say maybe like an emergency physician or like an EMT or a police or fire officer or firefighter, maybe a pilot, traffic control? We think like, what are the most stressful occupations? We're going to tell you these are not correct. What we think of as the most stressful occupations are usually wrong, and I'll explain why in a moment. But first, this stage of the stress response where you do not see weight loss is which one? Alarm, resistance, exhaustion, or none? And the answer is resistance. This is where you're appearing to function well, even though your body's kind of on overdrive. The stage of stress response where you see personality disorganization and the inappropriate use of defense mechanisms is which of these? Alarm, resistant, exhaustion, or none of these? And the answer is exhaustion. When we have reached the end and our bodies cannot keep up. Well, what events are stressful? They studied a large number of people and they asked them to rate the stress of different life events. And they kind of set the highest, death of a spouse, as 100, and divorce was 73. So basically, out of 100, how stressful something is. So basically, loss of your spouse, either through death or divorce, massively stressful. Followed by death of a close family member, personal injury, dismissal from work, financial state change. So we're seeing what these are. But look at other things. Outstanding personal achievement, very stressful. Changing jobs or changing your line of work. Beginning or ending school, still quite stressful. And these things are additive. Okay, so let's say that you change school, you move, let's see, you achieve something great, you have now different social activities, and this is adding up to like the stress level of the death of a spouse. These things added together over a short period of time can really have a massive stress, but we tend not to accept how important it is for us to consider the things we're going through and deal with them, as if, yes, these are stressful. What do we do? Even getting like a minor violation of the law, a traffic ticket can have an issue with stress, Now, let's go back to this. Our daily stress, we've talked about. We've talked about daily stress is interesting, so it's a better predictor of health than major events because it's kind of like this ongoing. And I'm asked what were the highest stress jobs, and it turns out the lower the status job, generally the higher the stress. So you think of what is a high status job, and you think of a low status job. Well, ER physician is not a low status job. Police or fireman, even EMT, but EMT is much lower status than the physician, and also lower paid, and therefore a much more stressful job because of the status issue. Consider how well we judge, various jobs. You think about the jobs that people don't want. These are hard. I've seen this when I was younger. I've done this. Cleaning office buildings at night. People don't even make eye contact with you. It's not like a prestigious thing to do. And it's hard. Well, also, some people deal better with others, and depression is a major, major factor. The more depressed people are, the more likely they are to report burnout. And so you can actually see that, the job might not be the issue until depression sets in, and then depression sets in, and there you are. Well, let's shift from stress to happiness. What makes people happy, and what makes them unhappy? If you were to ask people, what makes you happy? What could happen that would make you so happy, right? What would you say? What could happen that could ruin your happiness? What would you say? Usually people say what would make them super happy would be winning the lottery. And they say what would make them super unhappy would be having a major injury, right? Like ending up in a wheelchair. The interesting thing about this is we don't do a good job of predicting our happiness, because wheelchair-bound people and lottery winners feel the same level of happiness as they did before. So they track these people. After about a year, they go back to the same level of happiness. You have a default level of happiness. That's how happy you are. And no matter what happens out here, we're going to be about the same level of happy after time. You have a boost, and then it comes back down. So what we think is going to be this increase is temporary. It's not like a permanent change. And so they also saw that in terms of hopefulness, the people in the wheelchair felt more hopeful about the future. The people with the lotto ended up being very stressed. But again, it's been shown that lottery winners tend not to do that well. Someone who's affluent who wins the lottery, someone who already has decent money and good financial skills, and savings, will probably end up handling it a lot better. But lottery winners often aren't in that demographic. And they don't know how to handle a massive windfall too. Well, what actually makes people happy? Employment, having a job that you like is a big deal, and recreational sports. Turns out that people who play recreational sports are happier. Being in a sports league, doing softball, soccer, with your peers. What makes you feel unhappy? Well, losing your job is a major influence in happiness. Chronic pain is a major influence, feeling, and then sleep disorders. Yeah, not sleeping well sucks. Anybody surprised? I didn't think so. Sleep disorders are a major issue. There's also something, this was an article by Derek Bach on the politics of happiness, where he wrote about the paradox of what he called the paradox of the happy peasant, which was, why are people in some poorer countries, and he used Nigeria compared to Japan, why are people in Nigeria, a much poorer country, generally happier than people in Japan, a much more affluent country? And it's really complicated because it seems like there's a lot of factors involved in happiness. There's major cultural aspects of happiness. Now, it's true that the average person in the world says they're more happy than unhappy. There's more happiness in the world than unhappiness. Yay. But what is it about these? And there's some possible explanations for why people, who are in poor environments, where the entire, cultures are happier. And part of it could be choice. I've seen this, and you've probably seen this, that young people are often overwhelmed with choice. What do you want to do with your life? It's a terrifying thought to many people because there's so many options. There's just too many possibilities. You go to the grocery store and there's like, 30 different brands to choose from. Are you making the right decision? People with fewer opportunities, as long as they have some opportunities, it's easier to make that choice, right? That may be part of it. There may also be cultural factors that are involved. Well, happiness is defined as a combination of these things: pleasant life, the meaningful life, and the good life, right? And all of these things contribute to our happiness. Basically, do you enjoy your day-to-day things? Do you use your skills for enrichment? And do you feel like you're contributing to the greater good in some way? For most people, these are the things that make us feel like we're happy. So you think about like what kind of career you want, what do you want to do? That's part of it. Are you having skills that you're using, cool challenges, contributions? But also, are you enjoying the day to day? It's very common for people to get wrapped up in work, and that becomes everything, and we don't enjoy the day to day. Well, what do most people think will make them happy? I mentioned what most people think. We thought about it. Winning the lottery, having an injury, getting a good job, or playing sports. And the answer is they believe that winning the lottery is going to make them happy. On this list, playing recreational sports is actually, and getting a good job are actually the things that are going to influence this. What is actually most likely to make people unhappy? Gambling, losing their job, losing money, or having a major injury? And the answer is losing their job. Having a major injury they adapt to, losing their job, especially if they don't get another one, is a major influence. Now, why isn't money this great happiness, fix? Well, it is, but it isn't, and here's why. So there was a lot of research on this for a long time, and it felt like it kind of maxed out, like once you reached a certain level of income, you were cool. You didn't really need anything else. You were kind of like you reached that max, and that number bounced around. It was, historically maybe 40, 60, $80,000, different numbers in different studies. And it was kind of tough to figure out why it didn't seem to increase. And what we now understand is this. If you see this curve here, happiness increases faster, right, at lower amounts than it does at higher amounts. So the idea is this. It comes out to something like approximately this. To get the same boost of happiness from going from making $40,000 to $80,000, right? You would have to go from $80,000 to $160,000. You'd have to double again. So doubling your salary gives you a little boost of happiness. But to get that same boost, you would have to double it again. Not go from 80 to 120, go from 80 to 160. And every time you're doubling, right? And so that's why it's so difficult. That's part of the issue with why it's so hard to measure it. But when we look at it over, culturally, you can clearly see that the wealthier tend to be happier, right? And like wealthier countries, and wealthier people in those countries tend to be happier. You see small areas where you don't see the same thing, but you do see overall this is how it is. You notice this data is different than box data. So it's a very complicated thing to measure, and it's something that I think has been misunderstood. Now, Kahneman did some work on this. This was, for instance, looking at a number of factors related to happiness, including positive affect, where they asked, were you happy yesterday? Low stress, did you feel stressed yesterday? Not blue, did you feel sad yesterday? And what they call the ladder, which is how satisfied are you with your life overall? So you see, here's the ladder, right? And you see these different factors here. Well, it's very clear that these things all kind of like are additive. But what you look at with income here is, yeah, the more income people have, the happier they generally are, right? And you see like, you have this kind of, moving things kind of up, right? Higher income, the ladder is higher, even though these various measures tend to like flatten out, right? But adding all these things together, the higher incomes are less likely to be depressed, feel happier, feel less stressed. And we see also, there doesn't seem to be a max here. It does seem to continue increasing. But if we look at the scale again, we're doubling it. It's every time you double it, you get that boost. But then you kind of don't get the same boost, right? It kind of goes down a little bit. And there's some possible reasons for this. Maybe there's some issues. Maybe we stop appreciating it as it gets high. Here's another surprising one too. If you could make more money, but you'd have to drive further to work, would you do it? Right? Let's say you would have to drive 30 minutes more to work, but you would make 50% more money. Well, these things would cancel out in the beginning in terms of your overall happiness. And over time, the commute would bother you more than the money would make you happy, right? So we're looking at over time how we end up dealing with these things. And that's just fascinating. Like we don't think about lifestyle, right, as much as we think about money, right? We don't adjust to the hassle of this longer commute, but we do adjust to the increased income. So what would it really have to be? How much more money would you have to make for a longer commute to work? That's such an interesting factor here that, again, people don't quite think about. And I hope that as we're going over this, you're thinking, what kind of life do you want? What kind of job and career? And what, if the pursuit of happiness is really something we're going for, well, we should understand happiness if we're going to pursue it. There was a study, what's called the Harvard Grant Study, where they started back in, I believe, the 1930s. John F. Kennedy was one of the early members of the cohort, as were a large number of very successful people, Pulitzer Prize winners, senators, ambassadors. This was a wealthy group. Harvard at the time was, highly, highly wealthy. But they ended up following some other people in Boston too, a little bit later, and they found the same influences. That there were two factors for men that predicted their happiness in old age. Can you guess what those things are, right? When they were old and they were kind of evaluating their life, what were the things that influenced their levels of happiness? Well, interestingly, and almost not surprisingly, it was a loving relationship with their partner and work that they loved doing. Having a loving relationship with a partner and having a job that or work that they enjoyed were the biggest predictors. All these other things, like winning some great award or what we would call success, some measure of success, or money, didn't seem to have the same level as these things. Other influences that are clearly on happiness, right? These things help. Good self-esteem is a big deal. Big deal. Extroversion, I know that sucks, right? Totally not me. But people who are extroverted are happier. Money, to a certain extent that we saw. How attractive you think you are. I suppose this is related to self-esteem, self-confidence. How attractive you think you are is more important than how attractive you actually are. If you feel pretty, awesome, right? It's going to have a very positive influence on your happiness. What doesn't make people happy are things like raising children. People think that having children will make them happy. But it doesn't. It's actually, for most people, a stressor. We adapt to most negative and positive events. We have our own set levels of happiness. So what are we doing to be happy? We know certain things work. Looking at this, marriage, you get a tiny boost and then you adapt. Death of a spouse or unemployment, big drops, right? And then you come back up, but a lot harder to adapt from there as it does for, especially, if unemployment's maintained, than it does for that little boost you get for marriage. When you're happy, it's easier to find a job. You're more likely to have success. You enjoy experiences more. And this was part of the issue with great wealth, and why wealthy people, as it increased, the happiness might not increase as much. It's possible that great wealth impairs the savoring of many pleasures. There's so many that the appreciation isn't there. If having a couple of nice big vacations a year makes you happy, then all of a sudden there's no limit to these things. They might not have the same value for you. Do you want to be happier? Well, well-being interventions work, and this one you can do right now, and it will increase your happiness. At the end of the day, write down 3 good things that happened. So keep a pencil and paper next to your bed. I'd say put it in your phone, but no, get away from those things. We talk about sleep, we learned how important it is. Write down 3 good things that happen every day. At a society level, improving GDP, basically more money in general, decreasing corruption. Are we surprised that more corrupt societies are less happy? We have to fight as a culture, as a people, to decrease corruption, fight against corruption, to make sure that that we're happier when we don't have it. Good social support. Again, surprise, having a strong social safety economic network is important. Unemployment, welfare, helping people get back to good employment. Health's a big deal, right? And yeah, healthcare is a big deal. Places with universal healthcare, people tend to be happier because they know that even if they lose their job, it's not catastrophic, right? They can still be taken care of. They're not going to die of some horrible thing. Being generous, a generous society, that helps too. A lot of this work comes from this area of what's called positive psychology. And positive psychology is kind of like updated humanism. Humanism was a big deal in the 60s. The hippies loved it, and so everybody else kind of hated it. Like all those hippies with their humanism and the weird attitudes towards people being good. But positive psychology came back with the studies of happiness and looking at motivation and the things that are ways that we can maximize our abilities, right? Studies how we can build strength and psychological well-being. And the science of happiness includes altruism and empathy, creativity, forgiveness and compassion, and positive emotions, how to maximize these things. We want positive affect, this pleasurable engagement with the environment, such as happiness, joy, enthusiasm, alertness, and excitement. These are all protective factors against heart disease. Optimism, for instance, or the ability to look on the bright side, is also a predictor of good health. The last idea here is something called flow. Do you experience this? This is a major predictor of well-being. Do you have anything you do where you lose track of time, where you're so involved in it that nothing else seems to matter, right? If you do art, music, if you have some creative stuff that you do, that can help. If you like your work, you can have flow. People who love their work or hobbies, these things have to require skill, knowledge, something you work up to. And when you're in it, you're just going. And there's a lot of work done measuring flow and how this relates to our health and well-being. So I hope that you've enjoyed this and really gotten a lot out of this, because this is one of those areas where we can clearly see the study of psychology can make our lives better, right? Even if you're not getting deep into psychology, even if you're not going to major in it or focus on it for a long time, you can still take away from this, from what we're learning, some really valuable information that we can apply to our lives. Those 3 good things, even if you don't have time to get involved in recreational sports, and I hope you do, but those 3 good things can make your life better that quickly. Thank you, and I look forward to our future discussions.